morning. Thank you all so much for having me here. I'm truly honored to be here. So it's May of 2014. I've just wrapped up 10 years of practicing law as a criminal prosecutor at our nation's capital, and I've moved my family, my wife, and my 4 kids from Ottawa all the way to the GTA area, but really the businesses are in a rural area north of Aurelia. And before I can tell my family business story, you all need to understand who started our business, and you all need to meet my dad. So this is my dad. Born and raised in Egypt, immigrated to Canada. And my very first day of work, essentially, we're sitting in a small diner, meeting with someone who was basically a salesman for us, a go-between to land a big stone contract. And I'm excited to want to watch this unfold. The gentleman sits down with my father and myself and says, sorry to bear the bad news, guys, but the contractor's going to go in a different direction. He's not going to buy our stone. And me, being a normal, sane human, thinks, oh, okay, well, that's too bad. And then my dad looks at him and goes, no, they will buy our stone. and the guy kind of does a double take and says, no, I talked to them, and they're not that, no, they will buy our stone. He says, no, like Mr. Attia, I'm telling you. He goes, hey, I have the best stone in all of Canada. They will buy my stone. They will love my stone. And I'm sitting here watching this unfold, and I'm thinking, this is amazing. This is what's led to my father's success in business. This man does not take no for an answer. He idles at optimism. Everything is going to go his way no matter what. And it reminded me so much of his story and his entry into Canada. So he came to Canada in 1964. And he arrived by boat from Egypt. He had traveled from his hometown of Alexandria across the Mediterranean, trekked his way through Europe, and jumped on a boat in Europe and came across the Atlantic. And he arrives on Canada's shores in December of 1964. December 14th, in fact, and we know that because we still have his passport. And it's stamped right there. And you can only imagine what Canada looked like in the winter. And he arrives to see nothing but mountains and mountains of snow and icebergs. And he's, he thinks to himself as he does this, and you can only imagine what he's thinking. He's thinking, like any other immigrant who's just come here from a Mediterranean country to Canada in the winter, my goodness, what have I done, right? But not my dad. His very first thought when he sees all this snow and ice is, wow, look at all that snow and ice. That's amazing. I wonder if I can get it onto a boat and take it back to Egypt and sell it. Because when I was running my father's restaurants back home, I could never keep our Coca-Colas cold as we sold it on the beaches. So where everybody else saw disaster, my dad sees opportunity. And I just grew up around that atmosphere. It was just innate. It was just in our DNA to be positive and be optimistic. Well, I remember when I was applying to law school and took the LSAT, I didn't get the score I wanted the first time around. And I'm sitting there looking, head in hand sort of thing, like like my puppy's been killed. And my dad walks by and says, what's wrong? And I said, I took the LSAT, didn't get the score I wanted, And I'm thinking in my head, I'm never going to be a lawyer. I'll never. And he just goes, no problem. Take it again. Lots of great lawyers take it 2 or 3 times. You'll be fine. Come help me with something. It's like, there was just no opportunity at all to be negative, and it was great. Now, you've got a bit of a glimpse of my father. We're here today to talk about protecting the family business. Now, in my particular circumstance and in our family business, in order to protect our family business, I had to do something that I didn't necessarily expect. I had to jump into it. I had to dive into it. And there are really, you're going to see a couple of themes and a couple of principles that guided me and that have helped me and my family along that way. So, and I'll walk through each of them a little bit. But the first is that it has to start with gratitude. Because I'm of the view that if you're grateful, you can lead ultimately to greatness. Gratefulness leads to greatness. Number 2, you always have to have the tough talks. And you have to take action. You can't shy away from them, and you've got to follow through. And number 3, it's important in family business to recognize sometimes that your greatest asset is likely your greatest liability. And so, and of course, encompassing all of that is, and as you heard, Jeremy, thank you for the intro. You heard in the intro, my view is that in order to protect your business, you've got to strengthen your family first. If you strengthen your family, you can then strengthen and protect your family business. Now, just as a side note here, I see Alan Taylor here. He's probably wondering what my wife did. Did I deliberately pick a picture in which my arms look huge? And the answer is, of course I did. That was not an accident at all. My wife thought it was a great choice. I know Alan's sinking lower and lower into his chair, and that's totally fine. So let's talk with my story. It's May now of 2004, 40 years after my dad has arrived in Canada. I've just graduated law school. It's a very, very big day in my life. I'm so excited. I've landed a job at a great firm, and I'm really excited to start. And one of my best friends and roommate was there, and he decided to do a little exit interview with me, which I thought was cool. And one of the questions he asked me was, Paul, what is it that you're feeling most strongly right now? And I paused and I reflected upon that, and I thought, wow. And it dawned on me in that moment. My father was 26 when he had $300 to his name and traveled by boat came to Canada. And I was now 26, the same age that he was. But my situation at 26 was that I had my undergrad degree, my law degree, I had landed a great job. I was starting already. And he had started with nothing. And I couldn't believe it. In one generation, someone had done this. And his father, by the way, was literally born in the 1800s in rural Egypt, and he was illiterate. And I thought, how does that happen? How is it that, you go from that level to that level in such a short period of time? And at the same time, by the way, my brother was graduating med school, and my sister was about to start her business degree. And I'm not saying these things to be boastful or arrogant, but rather I'm proud of the work that my mother and my father have done. And you look at it and you just think, that is just phenomenal. And here I am, the proverbial man standing on the shoulders of giants. And I just thought to myself in that moment, wow, my father began life with an acorn, and he's built these oak trees. And now I'm handed an oak tree. And I just thought, Paul, it's up to you to go out and build some forests. That's your job in life. You better go out and do it. And I just felt a strong sense of gratitude. And that gratitude was towards my family. And the seeds were planted then as well, a sense of appreciation and a sense of wanting to be a steward of that and to honor that. And to recognize what my parents had done for me and to think, I need to go and obviously do them proud in my life with how I am as a husband and a father and as a lawyer, but also to look out for them. And so I continued on in my law profession. I landed my dream job as a criminal prosecutor in Ottawa. And I absolutely loved it. I loved being on my feet. I loved arguing cases that I really, really enjoyed and believed in. And Ottawa was a great, great life. I met my wife. We had 4 kids. It felt like inside of 2 weeks. We actually did have 4 kids in 4 years. And yes, I know you're all wondering, do you know how it's happening? And we've stopped sharing toothbrushes, so it's okay. And my career was really going in the best possible direction that it could have gone in. I was getting all the cases I wanted. Things at home were going really, really well. And then I made the mistake of going for a really long bike ride. And I went on this bike ride and I enjoy cycling. And I went on this bike ride with my brother. We were out in California. And at the top of one of the peaks that we were there, we were kind of waiting for the group to catch up. And we start talking. And we start talking about what are we going to do if something happens to Dad. And you realize that that's an important conversation to have. And his response and my response were both almost the same, which is we'd feel the need to kind of dive home and pick up the pieces, so to speak, to start running all the businesses because he was essentially running them by himself. And I just remember thinking that really didn't sit well with me. I didn't like the idea of my brother having been in a great spot in his life, my sister being in a great spot, myself being in a great spot, and then all of a sudden, catastrophe is going to come, and all of a sudden it's going to be a really upsetting situation. And what dawned on me in that moment was that all the great work that my parents had done was to give their kids a better future in Canada, and they had done that. And yet, the inability to have a discussion about succession and to plan for it was going to take that legacy that they had worked so hard to create, and it was then going to become the liability that was ruin us as a family. And I'm not talking about financial ruin. The businesses were in an okay spot, and we were all doing fine in our careers. I'm talking about a relationship ruin. Because the tension that would have existed had all of a sudden we had not had a succession plan and ill health, came upon my father would have been very bad. We wouldn't have known up from down. And so that really led me to obviously this notion of assets and liabilities. I'll talk in a moment, but from an action standpoint, I didn't really sit still. I took that thought, I talked to my wife about it, I called my brother, I talked to my sister, I asked them what their thoughts were, I told them what I was thinking about doing, and I just thought we need to kind of go and fix this. They were amazingly supportive of it. At that point in time, I reached out and got in touch with Cafe, actually. I got in touch with PAG. I remember, all jokes aside, having a phenomenal conversation with Alan Taylor, who gave me some brilliant advice. I remember Alan saying, look, there's only a couple ways this thing's going to end. You can either win the business and lose the family, win the family, lose the business, lose both, or win both. And that really resonated with me. And I remember deciding at that moment in time, I was like, all right, if I'm going to do this, I'm only optimizing for one possible outcome. I'm swinging for the fence here. I have to make sure that we win in the business and we win in the family. Family is the reason that we're here. Family is the reason I've been given the great life that I've been given. And this business has been part of that journey, but it can't ruin the other part of the journey. And so, that really was how I dove in. And I recognized during that time this notion of assets and liabilities. And what I've really relied on throughout this whole period of time is there needs to come a recognition that every single asset can be your greatest liability if not managed properly. So a family business itself is the best example. We all understand how that's an asset, physically and, of course, metaphorically. But it's a liability as well, because if poorly managed, it will destroy and ruin your family. It's like a fire. It can cook your food or it can kill you. And so you have to be very active in making sure that that asset remains as an asset and not a liability. As well, there are entities out there that can be both assets and liabilities. So I often think of pressure. I believe that pressure is a very good thing. I put a lot of pressure on myself, but it's pressure that comes from within. It's pressure that's based on what do I want to do. It's driving me forward. That's good pressure. I think there's very bad pressure from without, pressure that says you have to, you need to, you must. That's external pressure. It's toxic. And it's the difference from internal pressure that can take in a balloon and expand it, and external pressure that'll take a balloon and crush it. And so in terms of dealing with my father, which is really the reason that I got here in the first place, his greatest asset, hands down, was his inability to ever take in anything negative. He is the world's greatest optimist. No matter what, the glass is always half full for him. But that's a liability when it comes to family business and succession. Because a man like that will never want to talk about succession because succession is contingent upon his demise. And why would you ever want to talk about your demise? Why would you ever want to accept that reality? So he avoided that topic for so long. And it forced us as a family to have those tough talks and to take action. Now, inside of the time that we have, I, of course, can't go into the depths of what it was like to actually transition from having my own job and my own career to then working with my dad, let alone someone who's like my dad, who's always going to do things his way and run things. To say that it was tough would be the understatement of the century. And if I'm ever given an opportunity to share the story again, I'll go into it in much greater depth. But I'll simply say these two things about it. Number one, when people say I felt like quitting, I was quitting. I told my dad on many occasions, that's it, I've had enough. I shook his hand and I got the heck out of there. But number two, I always came back to those principles. I always went back to how grateful I was for my family. I always went back to the fact that I had to have those tough talks and take action, and I pushed through. And I always viewed the things of my dad that drove me nuts, his persistence, his inability to really want to deviate at all from his way. I always reminded myself, that's his greatest asset, and that's why we're here. And I need to make sure that I keep that as an asset and not let it become a liability. So when I go back to that conversation that I'd had at the beginning in terms of this vision that I have of winning in business and winning in family. I had a vision in my mind, and that vision was myself, my brother, my sister, our respective spouses, our kids, and our parents all enjoying wonderful moments together. Because up until that point, we'd had a lot of great moments, but there was always this overarching tension, this notion of what are we going to do when? And it would always, kind of take over a lot of the family moments. And I was like, I would just love for us to have some family moments where we could just be a family, and then the business stuff can take care of itself. And lo and behold, a couple years after I got into the business, we were fortunate enough to really get to that point as a family. And this picture brings me such joy because it came at the tail end of like a family vacation that we'd never done that before. And we were all just so happy, and my parents were just really in their glory. That's the entire family, all the siblings, our spouses, all the kids. And it was just amazing to see what had happened over the work of everyone. It wasn't just me. My brother was so supportive. My sister was supportive. I reached out to my PAG. These guys, there's a lot of my really good friends here today, and they'll know there was a lot of tough conversations, a lot of really, really difficult days, a lot of late night calls of me being in my car being like, what am I doing? I don't know if I can handle this. This is really tough. And to see it all kind of come through and to see our family get together like that, our business got into the best and most organized spot it's been, and it's continuing to grow. And our family is closer and more cohesive than ever. And that overall tension of what are we going to do? Now, I guess what's most interesting about this is you never really know what's going to happen. Because just a few months after this picture was taken, I'm sitting down for a coffee with my parents at Princess Margaret Hospital. We had just left the oncologist's office, and we got that news that none of us ever think you're going to get, but you know it can happen, you just don't think it'll happen to you. And of course, this tumor that had been growing in my dad was growing, and we'd been following it, and that was the day we got the news And so the oncologist sat down with myself and my mother and my father, with my brother on speakerphone and my sister on speakerphone, and said, look, I'm sorry to tell you, the biopsy's come out, it's cancer. And there's a way to treat it. We're going to have to put you through some radiation, and then we're going to have to put you into the knife and operate and take this thing out. And so we walk out there and we sit down and for the coffee, and I turn to my dad and I just say, like, Dad, wow, how are you? And he looks at me and he says, great, I don't have cancer. And I think, are you kidding me right now? Your reality distortion continues even in the face of like CAT scans that are telling you something. It's like, yes, I'll be fine, we'll be fine. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy's a machine. He really will never tolerate and ever listen to anything negative. So anyway, over the next few months, we embark as a family into this very difficult process of my dad going through all the preoperative radiation treatments. He's, of course, not at work anymore. I'm now running everything single-handedly. I'm still practicing law. I'm still trying to raise my kids. And what was so amazing about that period is how much my brother and my sister stepped in as well. Pete was just phenomenal, the medical stuff. It's like he just took over that portfolio in unbelievable fashion, was doing all the advocacy work, making sure my dad was getting all the best care, helping translate that lingo to us. My sister, even though she's at home with two very, very young kids, was just driving to my parents' house every day, shuttling them around everywhere, taking them meals, and I was able to keep kind of running the business. And my parents were able to do what parents should be able to do in that situation, which is just focus on each other and enjoy themselves as much as one can. And I'll never forget being in that hospital on August 8th, just this past year, just a few months ago, as my dad's about to get wheeled in for this major surgery. And you've all, maybe have an idea as to what those rooms look like. And most people are in there kind of alone. And my dad's in there surrounded by a team of people, really. It's his two sons and his daughter and his wife, and we're all kind of surrounding him as we're, peppering away the doctors with questions. And what was so interesting is as my dad gets wheeled away and we kind of say goodbye at that moment, one of the doctors kind of looks at us and then looks at my dad and says to my dad, wow, your family must really love you. And my dad, almost with a hint of like surprise, like almost with an intonation of like he's shocked by this news, kind of looks up and says, yeah, my family really does love me. And that moment just brought it all together for me. This is what life is about. This is what it's all about. Why did I dive into family business? It wasn't for money. It wasn't for a love of stone or anything like that. Look, I like business. It's a lot of fun, and I think it's a really cool business to get into. But really, the legacy is our family. It's the cohesion that we have as a family. And in order to protect our business, I had to really make sure that our family was always strengthened as we were growing the business. And really, that's the story, and that's the message that I want you all to try to leave with today. As you think about protecting your business, strengthen those family relationships. Have the really tough discussions. Be grateful for where you are. And recognize that every single thing you are presented with there has the potential to be a great asset and a great liability, and you are going to decide that. So I guess you're all wondering how things went. It was a 14-hour surgery. It was supposed to be, quite a bit shorter than that. It was a 14-hour surgery. We were pretty nervous all day, but we had a nice day together as a family. And but he came out of the surgery, and the surgery went really well. They removed the tumor and took the cancer out. And we get to all go in there and see my dad after the surgery. And I'll never forget it. I walk in there, and I sit down with my dad to kind of celebrate this moment. You're all emotional, and I look at him and I just say, Dad, like, how are you doing? And he looks at me and he says, great, I don't have cancer. So here's the final picture. This is our family. To protect your family business, strengthen your family first. Thank you all very much.